They called me the handyman at Cedarvale. That was fine. I'd been called worse and I'd been called better, and at 44 years old I had stopped caring much about titles. I showed up at 6, signed in at the maintenance desk, and spent my days fixing what broke. A stuck window, a warped door frame, a bathroom faucet that dripped all night and kept the residents awake. The work was quiet and the work was honest. And after losing my wife 3 years before, quiet and honest were the only things I needed. My son Marco was 9. He stayed with my neighbor Fran until I finished my shift at 3, and the arrangement suited us both. I didn't need a career. I needed to be home by 4. Diane Harlow ran the Harlow Group, 4 regional distribution centers, a logistics operation that moved medical supplies across 7 states. She was in Forbes. She had a driver and a standing reservation at the kind of restaurant where I'd never eaten. She also had a mother named Ruth who had lived at Cedarvale for 3 years, and who had not spoken a clear sentence in longer than that. I knew all of this the way maintenance workers know things. From the edges, from the hallways, from the low talk between nurses on a Tuesday. I knew Ruth by her room, 114. Corner unit, south-facing window, a cedar hope chest at the foot of her bed that had been there since she moved in. The chest had a music box built into the lid, a small brass mechanism with a cracked gear, and it hadn't played in years. I noticed it one morning when I was patching a hairline crack in her wall. Ruth was in her chair by the window, watching the light shift on the grass. She didn't look at me. She rarely looked at anyone, the nurses said. But when I set my toolbox on the floor and the latches clicked open, that clean, metal sound, she turned her head. Just slightly, just enough, I filed it away and kept patching the wall. Diane Harlow came to Cedarvale twice a week, always in the same gray coat, always with a tablet under her arm, and the expression of someone who had already lost one argument that morning. She had hired 3 specialists in the past year alone. A neurologist who adjusted Ruth's medication, a music therapist who ran 6 sessions before concluding that Ruth's responsiveness was too low to continue, a speech-language pathologist who tried for 2 months. They were all good people. I'm not saying otherwise. But I watched from the hallway a few times, and what I noticed was that they all came in talking. Tips. They filled the room with their voices and their credentials and their careful, gentle questions, and Ruth sat inside her silence and let the sound wash past her. She didn't need more voices. She needed something older than voices. I didn't tell anyone that. It wasn't my place. I was the handyman. But the next week, when I came back to finish the wall, I brought the cedar chest's music box with me. I'd taken it apart at my workbench at home the night before, cleaned the mechanism, sourced a replacement gear from a clock repair supplier online. Marco had watched me work, asking questions about the pins and the comb, and I'd explained each part the way my father once explained them to me. It took most of the evening. I sat up in the corner of Ruth's room during my lunch break. I didn't announce myself. I just sat on the floor with the mechanism spread across a cloth, the small parts arranged by size, and I began to reassemble it. The work made sounds. The precise click of gears, the soft drag of a brush, the faint ring of the comb teeth when I tested them with my thumbnail. Was in her chair. After about 10 minutes, I heard her shift in her seat. I didn't look up. I kept working. The next day I came back, and the day after. I told myself it was just lunch, just a place to sit. The truth was I knew what I was doing, or what I'd once known how to do. Though I hadn't done it in 3 years, and I wasn't sure I still had the standing. I had a master's degree in occupational therapy that I'd stopped using the year my wife died. Before that, I'd run a sensory memory program at a rehabilitation clinic for 6 years. I'd published 1 paper, small journal, small audience, on the use of tactile and acoustic anchors in mid to late stage dementia care. Familiar sounds, familiar materials, familiar physical tasks witnessed rather than imposed. The theory was simple. When language fails, the hands remember. When the mind cannot hold a conversation, it can sometimes hold a sound. I had left the clinic because Marco needed a father who came home. That was the whole reason. It wasn't a complicated decision. By the 4th visit, Ruth was watching my hands. Not drifting, not unfocused, watching. I was waxing the cedar box itself by then, rubbing the finish back into the old wood with a soft cloth in slow circles. Cedar has a smell that doesn't belong to any particular decade. It belongs to all of them at once. Closets and hope chests and grandmother's bedrooms. to things kept safe for a long time. The smell filled the room like something remembered rather than noticed. Ruth's hands, resting on the arms of her chair, began to move. Fingers made small stroking motions against the fabric, following the rhythm of mine, the way a person follows a song they haven't heard in years, but haven't entirely forgotten. I set the cloth down and placed the box gently on the tray beside her chair. I didn't say anything. She looked at it for a long moment, longer than I expected, and I kept my eyes on my work so she wouldn't feel watched. Then she put her hand on the wood. That was the moment I was waiting for, though I hadn't let myself call it that. In my old clinic, we used to say that the hands know what the mind no longer holds. It sounds like the kind of thing you print on a poster, but I had seen it be true enough times that I believed it the way I believed in load-bearing walls and level lines. Practically, without sentiment. I came back the next day, and the day after that. I brought a small plane and smoothed a rough patch on her windowsill. I brought a set of worn brass drawer pulls that needed polishing, and sat with them spread on the cloth, working each one to a shine. I wasn't performing anything. I was just a man doing his work in a quiet room, and Ruth was just a woman sitting nearby. And the sounds and the smells moved between us like a slow conversation that didn't need words. On the sixth day, wound the mechanism and set playing, a simple melody, 16 notes, repeating. Ruth closed her eyes. When she opened them, something behind them was different, more present, more there. The way a room looks after someone opens a window, not changed exactly. Aired out, real, she said. My mother had one of these. Her voice was low and a little rough from disuse, but it was clear. A complete sentence. Subject, verb, object. Orientation to memory and to self. I didn't move, I just said, tell me about it. And she did, 3 minutes, maybe 4. She told me about a blue bedroom, and a Sunday morning, and the smell of biscuits. And I sat on the floor beside her chair, and listened to every word. That was when Diane Harlow walked in. She stopped in the doorway. I saw her hand go to the frame to steady herself. She stood there and listened. And I watched her face do something I don't have a word for. A loosening, like a knot that had been pulled tight for a very long time finally giving way. Ruth wound down after a few minutes and settled back into quiet. But it was a different quiet than before. Softer at the edges. Diane looked at me. I picked up my toolbox and gave her the room. She found me 20 minutes later in the parking lot, loading my truck for the afternoon round. I heard her heels on the asphalt, a quick, deliberate sound, someone used to moving with purpose. And I kept my back to her for a moment, settling a canvas bag into the truck bed. Then I turned. She had come outside without her coat, which told me she hadn't planned to be long, or hadn't thought about it at all. She had the look of someone who had just done a little research. The clinical director had access to personnel files, and the clinical director and Diane Harlow had a long-standing relationship. I had figured this moment was possible. You wrote a paper, she said, sensory memory anchoring. The tactile bridge, you called it. Small journal, I said. Not many people read it. I read it, the whole thing. Just now in my car. She paused. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the music therapist and the speech-language pathologist and the way they'd come in, with their equipment and their intake forms and their careful, gentle authority. I thought about Ruth watching my hands on the cedar box, following the rhythm, arriving at a sound that reached back past the broken places to something earlier and whole. Because telling you would have made it something else, I said. It had to just be lunch. Diane was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was flat and warm, the kind that makes parking lots look almost peaceful. My mother knew who I was today, she said. For the first time in 3 years. She might not always, I said. I want you to know that. It doesn't hold every time. I know. She nodded. I know that then. Will you come back tomorrow? I looked at my watch. Marco would be at Fran another 40 minutes. I'll be here at 6, I said. Same as always. I drove home and picked up my son, and we ate dinner at the kitchen table while he told me about his day at school. A science project, a disagreement with a classmate, a joke he'd heard that he couldn't quite remember the punchline to. I listened to all of it. The window was open, and the evening was cool, and somewhere in the neighborhood a dog was barking at something it couldn't name. I thought about Ruth, and her blue bedroom and the smell of biscuits on a Sunday morning. Some things are too old and too deep to be lost completely. Sometimes, all they need is the right sound to find their way back. I showed up at 6 the next morning, signed in at the maintenance desk, picked up my toolbox. The work was quiet. The work was honest. That was enough.